edition of World Today, where we will be focusing on China-U.S. Summit level meeting. What were the deliverables? Also, the COP26 climate summit concluded with no real pledges or commitments by countries and world leaders. Why is China cracking down on cryptocurrency? In-depth analysis on that as well. But first up, the headlines. The virtual meeting between United States President Joe Biden and China's leader Xi Jinping made an attempt at easing growing tensions between the two countries, but did not make headway in resolving lingering US-China trade war disputes. Also, Taiwan became the big face-off point for the two countries. COP26 wraps up short of climate target, but high on blame games, with criticism for pushing through a late revision in the Glasgow Climate Pact. Overall, COP26 has failed to live up to its billing as the last best hope to limit this century's global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The blame games being played out are poor in climate finance and rich in hypocrisies. Peng Shuai, Chinese tennis star and former doubles world #1, has not been seen in public since she took to social media and accused former high-ranking official Zhang Gaoli of sexual assault. The Women's Tennis Association has warned Beijing of pulling its tournaments out of China if there isn't an adequate response to Peng Shuai's allegations. A meeting between equals. Make no mistake, the US is not the US of the past holding supremacy over others. And China is certainly not the China of the past, which will allow countries to dictate terms. That was the premise of the meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. While both countries met to ensure competition does not turn into conflict between the two countries, they still face hard-edged, irreconcilable differences. The question is, will the United States of America under President Joe Biden be able to handle a belligerent China under Xi Jinping?
Warm, respectful beginning of a summit-level meeting between US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Biden and Xi have not had a face-to-face meeting since Biden became president, and the last time they spoke was by telephone in September. Both sides struck a positive tone about their relationship going forward. But the big question is whether the US and China can constructively manage the slow-motion collision that is now unfolding between their very different worldviews.
Both China and United States are at a critical stage of development. Humanity is a global village, and we face multiple challenges. As the world's two largest economies and permanent members of UN Security Council, China and US need to increase communication and cooperation. Each run their domestic affairs well, and at the same time shoulder their share of international responsibilities and work together to advance the noble cause of world peace and development.
I'm happy we had found time to meet, and I look forward to a candid and forthright discussions like all the discussions we've had thus far. It seems to me our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended.
Let competition not become conflict wasn't Beijing's only message to Washington and to the world. Chinese President Xi Jinping warned his US counterpart that China would respond to provocations on Taiwan.
On issues concerning China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, China has no room for compromise. President Biden reiterated during the meeting that the United States adheres to the One China policy and does not support Taiwan's independence.
Taiwan is a thick red line for China and one that cannot be crossed. While the US was firm in its stand, Beijing sounds a firm warning.
Mr. President, what happens next on Taiwan? You said you talked to President Xi about it, but it's clear that there's a lot of tension on both sides.
Nothing happens. We're not going to change our policy at all.
Can you clarify what the policy is? Because you said today independence, and in the past...
No, I said that they have to decide. They, Taiwan, not us. And we are not encouraging independence. We're encouraging that they do exactly what the Taiwan Act requires.
The two sides disagree on issues of sovereignty and national interest, but they work together where interests intersect, especially on vital global issues like climate change.
多长时间？7个月，就第二次和第一次通话相隔了7个月。那么接下来
The era when China-U.S. relations are unilaterally defined by the U.S. has actually passed. So I think in the future, we will enter into a phase of equal treatment. One important thing is actually interactions. On the basis of mutual respect and equal treatment, we will form a new paradigm.
The areas of contention saw no solution in sight. They were raised and both sides put their stand forth. Some issues amounted to warning and threats. On Taiwan, US opposes unilateral efforts to change status quo, while China says there is no room for compromise and they do not want to be provoked. On trade, America focuses on healthy competition and China demands that their companies are not stifled with sanctions. On human rights, USA has expressed concerns over violation in Tibet, Hong Kong and Xinjiang, while China says that this is their internal affairs and America should not interfere. The US has been driving on a rough track when it comes to handling autocratic leaders. Be it his meeting with President Putin, who ridiculed him for wasting time talking about his family, or that matter, the Chinese president. In terms of deliverables, there was no momentum in the right direction.
Following a crackdown on cryptocurrencies earlier this year, China is now escalating its anti-crypto campaign. The Communist Party of China has outlined a new phase by banning cryptocurrency mining and other allied activities. Top authorities of the CPC are calling cryptocurrency mining extremely harmful and also one that increases the country's carbon footprint. Authorities have also said that cryptocurrency mining is against social and economic development of the country. But is that the only reason why China is banning and cracking down on the cryptocurrency industry? Here's a report.
China continues to crack down on cryptocurrency. Crypto mining and other crypto-related activities are now under scanner in China, following the ban on the digital currency in September. Top Chinese authorities have called the mining of cryptocurrencies extremely harmful. Chinese officials consider it to be a stumbling block in the country's bid to reduce carbon emissions. China has set a target to be carbon neutral by 2060 and has accused Bitcoin mining of consuming excessive energy and high carbon emissions. Meng Wei, China's top economic planner and National Development and Reform Commission spokesperson, lashed out at crypto mining and related activities, calling it blind and disorderly. She added that such activities pose prominent risks. This new decision by Communist Party officials puts a blanket ban on all crypto-related transactions. Offshore exchanges that previously allowed domestic residents to deal in cryptocurrencies will now be banned. Chinese Communist Party officials say the move to ban cryptocurrencies and subsequent mining will stop fraud and money laundering. Companies flouting the ban will not be allowed access to subsidized power provided by the state. They will have to pay higher prices to procure electricity. China's decision to ban crypto mining comes as latest data shows that the country accounts for over 45% of Bitcoin mining around the world. Chinese authorities realize that decentralized digital currencies pose a big financial risk to the economic and political stability of the nation. The ban on cryptocurrency is also seen as being in line with President Xi Jinping's vision of common prosperity and distribution of wealth.
desperation of landlocked Belarus to get its economy back on track is exceeding all humanitarian limits. President Alexander Lukashenko is now pushing migrants who've come from across the world, including Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, into Poland, which could lead to yet another migrant crisis like the one Europe witnessed in the year 2015. While the European Union is determined not to let Lukashenko have a win on this one, the real loss over here is of humanity. This even as migrants wait to get some glimmer of hope and a homeland in this bone-chilling winter.
The temperature here is under 3 degrees, but still not cold as the government's turning up here. Water cannons, tear gas, and weather, where some have frozen to death. The clashes on Eastern Europe borders erupted after thousands of migrants, desperate to find settling land, tried to cut barbed wires at Polish border. Polish riot police prevented them using full force after facing stone pelting by migrants.
There are people not only throwing stones but also grenades. These grenades were not taken from Iraq, Syria or other countries. These grenades could only be handed over to those who threw them at the policemen by the representatives of the services of the Belarusian regime.
These migrants from Istanbul, Erbil and Dubai are a political weapon used by Belarus's autocratic president Lukashenko, who has turned more authoritarian post the backlash faced by him after August 2020 presidential elections, when he won with 80% majority. His government faced nationwide massive protests, which landed many demonstrators and journalists in the jail.
We would both lose, both Belarus and to even bigger extent the European Union, which didn't let through the refugees to the EU territory. That is why we need to urgently make a decision about those people.
European Union, in response, imposed several sanctions on Belarus, which includes ban on flight over EU's airspace by Belarusian airlines and preventing access to all EU airports and some targeted economic sanctions. This move holds significance with regards to the incident that took place in May this year, when Ryanair flight was forced to land in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, with the aim of detaining the political activist and journalist Roman Pratasevich. Now landlocked Belarus is desperate to save its economy, and the best Lukashenko could think of was to threaten the EU countries with the migrant crisis. Reportedly, he first made all these refugees land in Minsk and then pushed all of them to the forest across the border. Poland too guarded their borders with barbed wires, and Polish armed forces prevented migrants from crossing borders. Adding to the chaos, Belarus, a strong Russian ally, has threatened to cut off the Russian gas pipeline, which passes through Belarus for Europe. The EU in response revised its sanctions and condemned the political use of migrants, stating that Europe is united.
My perception is that we are united and we are against the action of Lukashenko regime. This is not a bilateral issue between Lithuania, Latvia, Poland and Belarus. Rather, the issues between European Union and Belarus.
The government of Belarus on Thursday cleared the 2 major migrant camps on the border. The move may ease down the situation a bit, resulting in migrants shifting to the nearby warehouses. In this tug of war between the nations, humanity is suffering. For how long, it is yet to be seen.
Time for a short break here on World Today. On the other side, we'll talk about the shortcomings and the challenges of COP26. Stay tuned. Welcome back to World Today. COP26 is one of the latest and most important events in the decades-long UN effort to stave off what is now being called looming climate emergency. In 1992, UN organized a major event in Rio de Janeiro called the Earth Summit, where the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was adopted. Today, the treaty has 197 signatories. It is the 27th summit, but because of COVID-19, the entire summit skipped a year and therefore COP26. While the event only skipped a year, we have skipped decades in delivering on climate goals. This even as world leaders met and made pledges, commitments, there has been no forward movement. In Glasgow also, the urgency to fight climate change was completely lacking. Here's a report.
The protest condemned world leaders of failing to show the will to take tough decisions, and rightly so. A watered-down climate pact at Glasgow, and the blame game has begun.
Of course, I wish that we had managed to preserve the language on coal that was originally agreed. Nevertheless, we do have language on coal, on phase down, and I don't think anyone at the start of this process would have necessarily expected that that would have been retained, but it has. And I think that is down to the flexibility and the goodwill actually shown by many of the parties here today.
The UK, which holds presidency of COP26, has faced a lot of criticism for not being able to deliver. There was last-minute drama as the COP26 President Alok Sharma claimed India, backed by China and other coal-dependent developing nations, raised objections to the part of the agreement calling for a reduction in fossil fuels and asked for the wording to be rewritten from phase-out to phase-down of fossil fuel subsidies and coal. While passing the buck has begun, India was not the original author of the term phase-down. It was a term that was decided by consensus, according to sources. Also, India read out the amendment at the behest of Alok Sharma. In fact, it was featured in the China-U.S. joint statement that was concluded days ahead of the COP26 pact.
Been thinking about this for a couple of days, but I really do believe that as a result of this decision and as a result of the announcements that have been made over the course of the last 2 weeks, we are, in fact, closer than we have ever been before to avoiding climate chaos and securing cleaner air, a safer water, and healthier planet.
The amended clause asked countries to accelerate their efforts towards a coal power phase down instead of phase out. The fight is larger than just terminology. Developed versus developing nations. The developed world remains unwilling to make the sacrifices required to ensure developing nations can grow and fight climate change at the same time. There were some key achievements as well. Beyond the political negotiations and the Leaders' Summit, COP26 brought together about 50,000 participants online and in person to share innovative ideas, solutions, attend cultural events and build partnerships and coalitions.
We are here today to conduct a funeral ceremony for COPs 1 through 25 and also COP26 because each of these has been a failure and we feel that COP26 is also a failure. The agreements that have been set out are not sufficient to prevent catastrophic global heating according to the targets that have been set out by climate scientists, and we feel that this is not acceptable.
One of the biggest was that leaders from over 120 countries representing about 90% of the world's forests pledged to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. There was also a methane pledge led by the United States and the European Union, by which more than 100 countries agreed to cut emissions of this greenhouse gas by 2030. Meanwhile, more than 40 countries, including major coal users such as Poland, Vietnam and Chile, agreed to shift away from coal, one of the biggest generators of CO2 emissions.
The outcome of COP26 is a compromise. It reflects the interests, the contradictions, and the state of political will in the world today. It is an important step, but it's not enough. We must accelerate climate action to keep alive the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. It's time to go into emergency mode. We must end fossil fuel subsidies, phase out coal, put a price on carbon, protect vulnerable communities from the impacts of climate change, and make good on the $100 billion climate finance commitment to support developing countries.
For now, Glasgow was all talk, no firm commitment. The outcome document, known as the Glasgow Climate Pact, calls on 197 countries to report their progress towards more climate ambition next year. At COP27, set to take place in Egypt. The outcome also firms up the global agreement to accelerate action on climate this decade.
And here's World at a Glance with some other stories from across the world.
"15 people were shot dead and dozens were wounded by security forces during anti-coup demonstrations in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on Wednesday. Sudan's activists promise escalation of the protests after the deadliest day since the coup. World Tennis Association Chairman Steve Simon is willing to lose multi-million-dollar business in China if tennis player Peng Shuai is not fully accounted for and her allegations are not properly investigated. Peng, who is a Chinese tennis star, has not been seen in the public since she accused Zhang Goli, a former high-ranking official, of sexual assault. Naomi Osaka, Serena Williams, Novak Djokovic and several other players expressed their concerns on Twitter about the whereabouts of Peng. Russia is monitoring a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but tensions over the disputed region have risen this week. Armenia's defense minister said 6 Armenian soldiers were killed in border clashes with Azerbaijan on November 16.
That's all on the show. I'll see you next week with some more important international developments on World Today. Until then, news and updates continue here on India Today. Stay tuned.